Powerful insights often occur when you least expect them. On Transformative Leadership Conversations, they're at the heart of every episode. Hi, I'm your host, Winnie da Silva. In this season, I'm sharing short, focused, and practical leadership ideas and insights, myths worth challenging, and tools you can immediately apply to strengthen your leadership and build more effective teams. Today's episode highlights a framework I've used for many years with leaders at all levels, from brand new managers just starting to lead people to CEOs and their direct reports. What struck me over the years is that these core ideas hold up regardless of level. They're pretty timeless. This framework builds on work originally developed by Peter Axelson, and it's what I call adaptive leadership. So at its core, adaptive leadership is about this: choosing the right leadership approach for the right people in the right circumstances. What's required here is building awareness around yourself, the person you're leading, and the situation you're in, and then making a decision, a conscious decision, about how to lead in that moment. Adaptive leadership is all about proactively choosing which leadership approach or style that you want to use. So what exactly is adaptive leadership? So when you're practicing adaptive leadership, you're being flexible and responsive to the needs of the business and the people in front of you. You're focused on establishing rapport, understanding what's needed in the moment, and ultimately bringing out the best performance in other people. A fascinating aspect of this framework is that it's not dependent on your specific technical skills as a leader. You don't have to be the expert in everything your team is doing. In fact, the more senior you become, the less you know everything your direct reports are doing anyway. What's important is that you assess what's needed and then choose how to lead in a way that achieves both the best business outcome while at the same time developing your people along the way. So the way that I think about adaptive leadership is through a continuum. On the one end, you have directing. In the middle, you have collaborating. And on the other end, you have delegating. The driver behind this continuum is control, because what's shifting as you move along this continuum are these three elements of control: ownership of the work process, authority for making decisions, and responsibility for the results. Okay, so now on the directing side, there's more control by you, the leader, right? As you move more towards collaborating, that control, well, it starts to balance out between you and your direct report. And as you move towards delegating, more of that control shifts to your direct report. However, even in delegation, as much as you're delegating, control never completely zeroes out on your side as the leader. Even when you're delegating, you're still accountable as the leader. So let's make this really concrete. Say you're working with someone on a client deck. If you're in directing mode, you're telling them what you want to see on every slide, right? The storyline, the content, what's the format, the font, the colors. You're very hands-on. And when they're done, you should know exactly what you're going to get, right? If you're in collaboration mode, maybe you go to the whiteboard together. You're building the storyline at the same time. You're bouncing ideas off of each other. If you're in delegation mode, perhaps at this point, you describe the vision, what the deck needs to accomplish from a big picture perspective, and then you let them go and create it. This is how the adaptive leadership continuum unfolds. But the key here is that you don't stay in one place, you move along the continuum. But the question is, how do you decide where and when to move? Well, there are three things you'll want to consider. You'll want to consider yourself, the leader, right? The direct report, and the situation. So let me add some more color to that. So first, there's you as the leader. What are the things that you need to consider? What's your background, your experience, your values? What's your orientation around trust? What I think is interesting about trust, and if you listen to the trust episode, you know more about how I think about trust. You might be someone who naturally trusts people, right? Until they break your trust, you give them a lot of space. Or you don't trust anyone until they prove that they can be trustworthy, right? So those kinds of areas and orientation around trust will determine which leadership mode you prefer to use, right? Or what's your tolerance for risk? What's your tolerance for ambiguity? What's your judgment about who's best qualified for this work? Is it you or someone else? And then, of course, what's your default leadership mode? So all these things are in play when you think about which leadership mode you should use. Okay, now let's go to the direct report. What should you consider there? Well, first you should consider what's their need for independence. Do they want to be independent, or maybe they're holding back? What's their readiness to take on responsibility and to do the next level thing? What are their current skills, capabilities? What knowledge and experience do they have? What's their interest in doing the work? Now, that's an interesting one, right? So I had a client a while ago. She moved the office for an entire company. She did an incredible job, right? She managed the logistics, the design, the numbers, all of it. So when it came time to move again, she was the obvious choice, right? She had all this experience. She'd done it all. However, she had very little interest in doing it again. So just because someone is highly capable, it still may not mean that they're the right person to fully own something, especially if you take their development into consideration. At the same time, maybe they just had to do it, like this client of mine who had to move the office again. Okay, then third, there's the situation. What do we want to consider there? So you want to consider how complex is the work, right? Is it simple? Is it really complex with lots of moving parts? What's the timeline, right? Is this a situation where it's due tomorrow, or you've got a couple of weeks or months? Well, is this a high stakes situation with no room for error? Or is it a low stakes project? What are the expectations from others? Your boss, your client, perhaps the board? Also to consider, what are the norms of your team and how effective is the team overall? So what I'll typically do at this point when I'm working with a team, after I walk through this framework and the whole continuum, I'll ask everyone to think about which is their preferred mode along this continuum. So I ask them, are you someone who's on the directing side? Do you prefer to collaborate? Or do you lean more towards delegation? Or are you somewhere in between? So then I'll ask people to stand up and place themselves along the continuum, like with their bodies, right? So we've got a horseshoe going on and everyone's standing in a certain place. And what's important to note is that there is no right place to be. This is really important because every single one of these leadership modes is useful. It just depends on you, your direct report, and the situation. So then I ask folks to form small groups with the people next to them and explore the benefits and drawbacks of their preferred mode. Then we discuss their findings together. Here are a few examples of what we typically come up with. Okay, so first let's look at directing. Some of the benefits of the directing leadership mode include these. So from a leadership standpoint, you can set very clear expectations and take on more control over the work process, the decisions, and often the outcome, which can reduce ambiguity, increase efficiency, and it can protect the quality of the work. For the business, this creates speed, clarity, and consistency. You know what you're going to get. This is especially valuable in high-stakes situations, tight timelines, or when the cost of error is high. From a development perspective, directing can be useful, especially early on in someone's career or when they first join the company or the team. Directing can give someone a clear picture of what good looks like. It can reduce ambiguity and it can accelerate learning when someone is new or unfamiliar with the work. Okay, what are the drawbacks of directing? Well, some of the drawbacks relate to you. So when your direct report becomes dependent on you, it might be too much, right? They stop thinking for themselves, or they hold back on being innovative or bringing new ideas to the table. Their growth can stall because they're executing rather than learning how to think. Or they might think, you're going to change it anyway, so why bother thinking on my own? I need to do exactly what they want. It can also significantly reduce the type of ownership you want your direct reports to develop. As a leader, you can also become the bottleneck. Everything starts to run through you. You're over-involved, overextended, and frustrated. You're now spending time on details which are holding you back on spending time on more strategic challenges. Over time, what started as clarity can turn into micromanagement. Okay, let's move on to collaborating. When does the collaborating leadership mode work well? So, what are the benefits? Okay, so from a leadership standpoint, you're creating space for dialogue. You're asking questions, building on ideas, engaging the other person, and shaping the outcome. You also get insights, this is important, about your direct report, how they think, and where their strengths and development areas lie. Things you might not be able to uncover unless you have these kinds of conversations. People are also learning how to think, how to problem solve, how to contribute. They're not just executing, they're participating. It also builds ownership. When people are part of creating something, they're more invested in it. This can also lead to better decisions. You're pulling in multiple perspectives, which can improve the quality of the ideas and therefore the work output, potentially reducing blind spots and creating more innovative ideas. Okay, what about when collaboration doesn't work? What are the drawbacks? Well, it can take more time because you're both putting in potentially a significant amount of work upfront at the same time. If everything becomes collaborative, decisions can take longer. You can get stuck in discussion without clear direction. It's also not always an ideal leadership choice when the time frame is tight. It can also potentially create confusion around ownership. Who is actually doing what? Who's accountable for the result? And from a leadership perspective, this is where some leaders unintentionally avoid making decisions. They stay in collaboration when what's actually needed is clarity. Okay, let's go to delegating. What are the benefits? Well, as a leader, you're intentionally shifting ownership of the work, the decisions, and much of the outcome to someone else while still holding yourself accountable for the result. But the benefits of this happens on multiple levels. It allows you to scale. It has the potential to build strategic thinking and decision-making skills within your team. And it creates stronger ownership of the results because the person doing the work is also owning the outcome. For the business, this creates scale. You're no longer the limiting factor. Work moves without you being in every detail. This is also good for you because you can now spend more time on strategic leadership work. What about when it doesn't work? The drawbacks of delegation. If expectations aren't clear, if context isn't shared, or if the person isn't ready, they can feel lost. They don't know what good looks like. They don't know how to make decisions. And then they start spinning their wheels, potentially wasting their time and essentially your time because they're not able to make progress. It can actually slow growth in that person if they're not set up well, because instead of learning, they're just trying to figure out what's going on. The risk to the business can also increase. Work can go in the totally wrong direction at the wrong time. You may have to step back in and redo everything, and that can create frustration on both sides. As you can see, this adaptive leadership framework isn't about picking one leadership style or approach and then sticking to it. It's about understanding the trade-offs and knowing when each approach works and when it doesn't, and picking the right leadership mode with the right person in the right situation. Another way to look at it is this. You don't choose one and then declare, this is my leadership mode. Because of course, good leaders are constantly reassessing and readjusting based on what they're seeing from the person, the work, and the situation. Because you might start by delegating because you want someone to take ownership, but then realize pretty quickly that they need more guidance, more context, or more clarity than you originally thought. Or you might begin in a much more directing mode because the stakes are high or the person is new, and then gradually move towards collaboration and delegation as their confidence, capability, and judgment improve. The point here is not to perfectly pick the right mode once. The point is to stay engaged enough as a leader to notice what's needed and adapt accordingly. I want to take you back to being in the room when I do this leadership session live. So after we explore together all the benefits and drawbacks of each mode, kind of like we just did here together, I ask them to do one more thing. I ask them to stand up and now go to the area of this continuum where you want your boss to lead you. Now, some people stay right where they are, but there's many people who move around. Want to guess where they mostly move to? You guessed it, delegation. Now, I will say that not everyone moves to delegation, but most do. But of course, it all depends, doesn't it? Learning to become an adaptive leader is a huge differentiator because it requires a level of awareness and intentionality that many leaders don't make explicit. You have to understand yourself, right? Your instincts, your preferred mode, your comfort level with risk and control. You have to understand the people you lead, their capabilities, their readiness, their need for support or independence. And you have to understand the situation itself. What are the stakes, the complexity, the timeline, the broader business context? So then, instead of defaulting to one leadership style over and over again, you make a conscious decision about how to lead in that moment. Not just to get the best business outcomes, although that certainly matters for sure, but also to help the people around you that are on your team to grow, develop, and become more capable over time. Because ultimately, that's the job of leadership. In an upcoming episode this season, I'll share a real client example that brings these concepts to life. So as you come out of this episode, one thing I'd encourage you to do is to spend a little time reflecting where you naturally sit on this continuum. Do you tend to direct? Do you prefer to collaborate? Do you lean towards delegation? Then think about one specific person on your team. How are you currently leading them? Is the approach you're using the approach they need right now based on their experience, confidence, abilities, and the situation you're both in? Or is there an adjustment you need to make? If you want to think through this more deeply, please reach out directly to me and I'll send you at no cost and no obligation a worksheet you can use to reflect on your own leadership patterns and apply this framework directly and more intentionally with your own team. Because in the end, the best leaders don't rely on one leadership style. They understand the strengths and limitations of each approach. They stay aware of what's needed and they adapt as the situation changes. Thank you for listening to this episode of Transformative Leadership Conversations. If you're ready to take your leadership to the next level or empower your teams for success, I'm here to help. Reach out to me directly at winnie@winifred.org or visit me at www.winniedasilva.com to learn more about me and my work, coaching executives, developing critical leadership skills, and helping organizations build effective teams. You can also find me on Substack, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And remember, you're always welcome to take a seat at the table where every conversation has the potential for transformative change.